something that most of us give much thought to anymore. A few of us from the church health team, Debbie and Sarah and I, were over at Jane Johnson's yesterday doing some recon for our retreat. And afterward, Sarah asked me, well, do you need directions to get back? I said, oh no, I'll just plug it into my GPS. Though I'm slowly learning my way around St. Pete most of the time, I get where I'm going, to whoever it is I'm going and trying to see rather mindlessly. I Google the address, I plug it in, and then I sit back and let it take over, let it give me every turn I need to take. And so I was a little caught off guard when I got somewhere and I couldn't use my GPS. You see, one of GPS's downfalls is construction detour. When we first moved here, our dogs were used to eating food from Trader Joe's, which is a grocery store, and right now they're only over in Tampa. But they had been through so much change and so many transitions, and their stomachs were already a little wonky that we decided, well, we're not going to change their food on them. But of course, it was 8 p.m. one night, and we realized we were out of dog food, that there wasn't an extra bag in the garage as we had thought. And so, of course, I had to jump in the car and head over to Tampa. It was dark, it was raining that night, and I had driven in Tampa, maybe 2 or 3 times. My handy smartphone GPS got me there just fine, even without having driven in Tampa very much. But when my shopping was done and I had loaded the several bags of dog food into the back and got back in the car and plugged in the address, I started to drive. And there, right across the on-ramp for 275 to get back on the Gandy Bridge, was that dreaded detour sign. And so I started to follow the detour signs, except it was dark and it was rainy and I didn't know my way around and they were spaced far too far apart. And somehow I lost my way. And I started to get that slightly irrational, panicky feeling that you get when you're lost and you're not sure where you are or how to get home. The driving without GPS for me is a little like staring at the sun and then going into a dark room and trying to find your way around with the reverberations of that light still fresh in your eyes, blinding you. And the most natural thing in those cases, of course, is to want to retrace your steps. You want to move into familiar territory. You want to take the steps you've already taken or in the car. You want to take the turns you've already taken, just in reverse. Turn left instead of right. There's some comfort as you return home to seeing landmarks and things that you recognize that you've seen before. They let you know you're on the right track. I hate those dreaded detour signs. And so I wonder at the wise ones. Sure, they were capable astronomers, skilled like sailors at navigating by the stars. They were even skilled at deducing prophecies and foretelling the future by reading the stars. But what happened when they had stared for so long at one bright star, when they had seen the radiant face of Christ, and then they turned back into the relative darkness to try to make their way home? And they were forced to return home a different way than the way they had come. You know, sometimes it is not finding Jesus that is hard, but it's finding our way home after we encounter Jesus. Because he so changes us that home no longer feels like home, and the way we came may not be the way we return. Charles Anderson, a marine biologist who lives in the Maldives, stumbled upon a discovery quite accidentally recently. He noticed that there were swarms of dragonflies at certain times of the year in the Maldives. And it's a certain of dragonfly called a globe skimmer because they're found all over the world. And usually, he pointed out, dragonflies don't go very far. Despite being quite good flyers, they have a short lifespan, and so they don't go very far. They stick pretty close to where they're going to be able to breed and perpetuate the next generation. But because of the makeup of the Maldives, with no standing water, it's just sand, and so water tends to go right through, so there's no standing water on the surface of the islands. He said there weren't any breeding grounds. And he knew it wasn't their final destination. And he knew it wasn't their starting place. And so he started to trace their movement. He called various scientist friends up and down the Maldive Islands and all the way in India, trying to trace these dragonflies. Now, as most of you probably know, the Maldives are about 400 miles off of the coast of India. And he discovered that these dragonflies were in fact coming all the way from India. They were leaving there in September and arriving in the Maldives. But the weather systems at that time of year, the monsoon season, are such that the winds are actually flowing from the Maldives toward India, not the other way around. And he couldn't figure out how these dragonflies, good flyers or not, were making this 400-mile journey from India to the Maldives against the wind. And then he realized something about the weather systems. Seasonally, the monsoon winds will come in, and they come in at the opposite direction of the way the wind usually would go. But it's not like the old winds just disappear, just change directions. No, the new winds, or the old winds, are still there. They're just above these new winds that come in. And what he realized was that these dragonflies were rising above the one system to catch the winds of the other system and to make that 400-mile journey from India to the Maldives. And in fact, they weren't only making a 400-mile journey. He discovered that they were going all the way over to East Africa and then down into South Africa. That they were making this whole circuit around the Indian Ocean. These 2-inch insects travel nearly 1,000 miles over the course of 4 generations around the Indian Ocean. They follow the summer monsoon rains because they breed in the warm, temperate, standing waters that these rains create. And if they fly high enough, and if they're willing to turn in the opposite direction of the winds of the storm, they break free of those storm winds and they find a different kind of wind to carry them toward the possibility of new life. But it always means entering uncharted, unfamiliar territory. It always means heading home by another way. No one generation of dragonflies is ever in the same place twice. I wonder where the winds of your life are blowing right now. I wonder where the winds of our society are blowing us right now. What are our addictions, our fears, our self-destructive or short-sighted desires and habits and behaviors? What are the weather patterns that lock us in? Lock us into pulling one another down? And how often have we simply let the storm winds carry us along? Have we been bold enough, strong enough, brave enough to rise above our current weather patterns and catch the winds of the Spirit, the current of the light of Christ that will take us home by another way. Most of us desperately want things to be different. It is why we make New Year's resolutions. It's why we listen to the State of the Union address every year, because we want to know, what are the goals that we're setting? How can we change things? But following a different path, an unfamiliar one, is a bit terrifying. Most of us want to go back to the familiar regardless of the consequences. But life, particularly the rich life in the kingdom of Christ, often lies in a different current, in a different wisdom, a wisdom that belongs to those who are willing to take a different path. Commenting on the South after the Jim Crow laws were struck down, Shelley Copeland writes, "Some people were ready to walk in the dimensions of the unknown, and others were not." The wise ones believed, no doubt, as the saying goes, that their fate was written in the stars. That the stars tell us where to go and who to be. But St. Augustine put it a little bit different. He said Christ was not born because the star shone forth. The star shone forth because Christ was born. We should not say that the star was fate for Christ, but that Christ was fate for the star. Or as Dante puts it, God's love moves the stars. In other words, as contemporary commentator James Howe writes, we are not star-crossed victims of fate. What a different, wonderful picture that paints. God's love is not like those old MapQuest directions I used to print out. And then if I made one wrong turn, I was completely lost. No, it's a little more like a GPS unit, something that takes our wrong turns in stride, that says, make the next available U-turn, recalculating. And it may even be better than most GPS units that I've ever encountered, because this one can recalculate for the detour signs and warn of danger up ahead. One that can get us safely home by another way, perhaps only by another way. James Taylor sings a song about these wise ones. It's called Home by Another Way. He says, yes, they went home by another way, home by another way. Maybe you and me can be wise guys too and go home by another way. We can make it another way, say home as they used to say. Keep a weather eye to the chart line.